G'day guys, what's cracking? It's Ralph here, and today we're looking at whether you should buy a Z5, a Z6, or a Z6II. It's a question I get asked all the time, and with the prices shifting quite dramatically, I figure it's a really helpful video for you. At the moment, the Z5 retails for $1,296. 6 months ago, it was only $999. The Z6 currently retails for $1,596, and 6 months ago it was $1,496. Strange, right? And the Z6 that I don't have, but we'll talk about why, retails for $1,996. So the question is, for an extra $300, should you buy a Z6 instead of a Z5? And for an extra $400 on top of that, should you buy a Z6II or not? I've got a bunch of videos already on my channel which look at the Z6 and the Z5 and their strengths and weaknesses, their limitations and advantages, and so I'll put some of them at the end of this so you can have a look through and see if one of those videos fills in some of the gaps. So I'm not going to cover all the specs and all the details today. I think that will be wasting our time, but what I want to look at is, for an extra $300, what do you get? You start with an LCD screen on top. The mode wheel sits on the other side, but it has a button that you need to press in order to activate the different modes. For the megapixels, you get 0.2 extra. So this is 24.5, this is 24.3. The difference is really not even worth talking about. On this, you get uncropped 4K video. And you're like, well, what does that mean? Well, it basically means that when you shoot on the same millimeterage focal point, on this you get a wider screen, it gets better in low light, and it's better quality, but only by a marginal amount. You can also shoot video in N-Log on this, which is a real advantage if you're making some high-end video for a client, and it is easier to manually focus in the dark. In really low light situations, when you put manual focus on and you're using the screen on the back, the Z6 is much easier to focus in on what you're trying to focus in on. Also, the Z6 has what's called a BSI sensor. That's a backside illuminated sensor. It means it's more efficient and effective in low light circumstances. So the sensor has the ability to draw more light in, it becomes more sensitive, and therefore you get better quality images and better video. So it puts it ahead in the low light department. So if you're doing some low light photography, that's a $300 bonus that you can get with this camera. One of the limitations, you can't charge and shoot on this camera, but you can charge and shoot on this camera. Plenty to think about, isn't there? So what about when we challenge and compare the Z6 with the Z6II that I don't have? Now, the reason I don't have it is because when I first I bought in early before the Z6II ever existed. And so I bought the Z6 and I've really enjoyed this camera. And then the Z6II came out with some really interesting developments that we'll talk about in just a minute. But the problem is, it wasn't a $400 increase for me. I had this camera, so I had to spend the $2,000 from zero on it. And I wasn't prepared to do that until the other day when my Z6, the screen went broken. I talked to Nikon about it, and they said that the screen had a black blotch on it. They said the screen has clearly been highly impacted by something, and honestly, not a word of a lie, the high impact was this. So I'm pretty disappointed with that. It costs between $400 and $700 to get replaced, depending on where you go and who you go with and how you juggle that whole deal around. So I don't know what to do. What should I do? Comment below. Please let me know what I should do. Should I repair the screen and stick with the Z6, or let's get into the improvements of the Z6II, and you can tell me whether you think it's worth it for me as well as if it's worth it for you. So the megapixels are the same, but this comes with a dual X-Speed 6 processor. So the processor in this and the processor in this is exactly the same, but with this you get two processors. That basically means it creates greater buffer, which we'll talk about in just a minute. It gives you more autofocus, and the continuous shooting speed is much better. Now, with the Z6II, you get 14 frames a second as opposed to 12 frames a second, as opposed to 4.5 frames a second, right? So if you're extra 300, you're getting from 4.5 frames a second to 11 frames a second, and then for your extra 400, you're getting 14 frames a second, if that's important to you. It also has a greater buffer because of its two X-Speed 6 processors. What that means is it can store more information as you're shooting, so it improves your ability to continuously shoot. That means at 14 frames a second, you can shoot for 9 seconds without the camera slowing down and going, whoa, 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 calm down, whereas the Z6 slows down at about 3 seconds. Now, the autofocus on the Z6II is improved by 1 stop in low light. That means if you were to use this to its capabilities and you got to the point where going, oh, it's too dark, I can't focus anymore, you'd still have some extra time in the dark with the Z6II to focus, because it gives you 1 extra stop. So it's like being able to take your aperture down from a 4 to a 2.8. 1 stop. Just 1 stop for $400. The Z6II also comes with an improved refresh rate on the EVF, which is really nice, but I think the big win, and the thing we all need to think about, is SD cards. Now, the Z5 has 2 SD card slots. The Z6 has 1 XQD card slot, and the Z6II has 2 card slots. One's for XQD, but also CF Express, and the other's for SD. And yes, you can run them together, you can shoot them parallel, or you can take one for RAW and one for JPEG, which is really, really handy, especially if you need a backup. The challenge with this camera from this camera is XQD cards are expensive, and we'll talk about how that smashes into the price of all these a little bit later on. With the Z6II, you can put an SD card in, but if you want a second card, it has to be an XQD card, and again, they're expensive. Now, what's cool about the Z6II is you can shoot time lapses as well as taking a video of the time lapse. So you have complete manual control over it and editing control over it, but it also takes a video for you if you just want to bang out one of them. It's a really exciting feature that the Z6 doesn't have. This does 4K in 60 frames a second. This does 4K in 30 frames a second. But the 4K over here is on a 1.5 crop, but the other video abilities are the same. You can also use SnapBridge to do the firmware update over here, but with these you have to do old school, where you plug your card into the computer and you load down the firmware onto your card, and then you plug the card back in, and then you go through the menu. You can just do it all on the app on SnapBridge over here. Pretty handy. $400 worth? I don't know. How's it stacking up for you? Now, the battery over here shoots with an EN-EL15C, which means nothing to you, except you get 30 extra shots and you get 15 extra minutes video. I should say or you can't have it all, but I find this shoots way more than it says you'll be able to anyway. So you do get more out of your battery life, but it's marginal. The Z6II weighs 1 ounce more, or for those of you that are like me, 30 grams more, and it's 2 millimeters thicker. So are the advantages worth it? From a $300 jump and a $400 jump, well, if you're watching this video, it's because you value your money and you can't splurge. If you can splurge, obviously you're going to get the Z6II because it's the most recent camera out. If money is no object, you get the Z9. Duh. But if money is an object and you're like, where do I land? How much can you afford? Does your budget stop here? This is a good camera. Does it stop here? This is a great camera. Or does it go to the best that price range will allow? All of them fit the same lenses. They all have a Z mount on it, so they can take any of the lenses and any of the things that you do with each of these cameras. They've all got the toggles on the sides, so you can strap it around. They've all got a back shutter dial and a front aperture dial, and all of them are customizable, so you can make the buttons do the different things that you might want the buttons to do. So which one is for you? And maybe you're like, oh, I can afford this, but if I just wait a couple of months, I can afford this. Well, wait a couple of months and buy the better camera. And the reason you do that is because once you buy this, you've dumped all your cash on it, right? And you're stuck with the limitations of this. But if you can wait for a little bit and save and buy this, or wait for a little bit and save and buy this, then you'll be ahead. You'll feel much better about your purchase, and then you use the camera to the maximum of its ability. You push yourself creatively into what that camera can do for you and how it can be most beneficial to your use. Let's talk about a factor that doesn't get talked about much, but is absolutely essential because it's the sting after you buy the camera, right? And that's SD cards. It's memory cards that you put in these cameras. With this, if you put two 256 gigabyte cards in it, it will cost you a total of $100. So that brings the total to $13.94, right? So for this camera to get going with it, providing you've got some glass to stick on it, is $13.94. Now for this camera, the card costs you $380 for an XQD card. So you buy the camera and then you stick the XQD card in it and you're like, man, that was brutal. So this camera, to actually get you going, is $1,974. That's an increase of 41%, 41.6% actually from this. So there's a jump of 41.6% to this. Now to put an XQD card and an SD card, both of 250 or 256 gig in the Z6II, is a whopping total of $2,424, which is actually only a 22.8% increase to this. So what that means to deck out these cameras so you can actually use them is there's a big leap from the Z5 to the Z6, and then not so much as big a leap to the Z6II based on current US prices. And as we've seen, these cameras going up and down all over the place. The Z9 comes up and the cameras increase in value. So my hunch is that over time, as they bring out a Z8 and they work out this whole deal, they may bring out a Z5 too. As they do that, they'll actually the prices on these will calm down again. But right at the moment, it's a hard time to buy a camera. It's not cheap. It's not as cheap as it was 6 months ago or a year ago. So I hope this video has been helpful. I'd love for you to subscribe and consider joining the channel. It's just down there. There's a join tab. Just click on that and there's a bit of a video that explains how it works and what it does. If you'd like to be part of what we're doing here, I really appreciate that you'd watch this video, that you join in the fun, and hopefully there's a bunch more helpful stuff on the channel that you can check out. And until next time, I'll catch you later. Bye. But this comes, sorry about this, bit awkward, I realise, or drop your shutter speed, increase your, or drop your shutter. So, you know, we said, well, the difference is that right?